I think your background's awesome, and there's so much to ask you, whether it's your athletic career or professional career. But I actually want to start a little bit earlier in your life. And I wonder if you could take me back to the first time that you hit a tennis ball and share a little bit about what you remember from those moments.
I think the first time I hit a tennis ball, I would have been probably about 2 years old. Uh, Apparently, it was pretty much as soon as I could walk. I grew up on a farm in New Zealand and have an older brother and sister, and they wanted to be involved when my mum and dad were having a little muck around on the tennis court in a summer evening, and whatever especially my older brother did, I wanted to do. So there are photos of me dragging around a tennis racket. Apparently, I wouldn't have anything to do with a kid-sized tennis racket. I only wanted to pick up the adult ones. So yeah, apparently I was hitting tennis balls when I was about two. Uh,
Wow.
so I can't remember the first time hitting a tennis ball because it was just something that I grew up with from such a young age. But it wasn't really until I was about 15 that I started taking it what I would consider seriously, and even then I didn't really know what taking it seriously meant.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's actually surprising to hear that only at 15, like you really went all in on it. Is that common for tennis? For people who end up, going pro, winning medals, like being really at the top of their game? Like, is that considered late?
Yeah, it's definitely late. Tennis is one sport where people seem to specialize very young and, go into sort of 3, 4, 5 hours of training a day when they're anywhere from sort of 10 to 12 years old. Uh, I had a really typical Kiwi childhood, so I played every single sport I could get my hands on. And it was only actually when I was sort of forced to give up soccer. I made a national squad in soccer, um, and they said that if I wanted to stay in the squad, then I'd have to train year round. So it sort of forced a decision, sort of a choice between tennis and soccer at the time, and I chose tennis, and that was the first moment where I sort of thought to myself, okay, well, if I've given up something that I really love doing, then I should probably start taking tennis a little more seriously and moved to Auckland, the biggest city in New Zealand, and went to boarding school so I could try and practice a little more. But even then, I was practicing probably an average of 1.5 to 2 hours a day. And it was only when I was 17 and I did my final year of school uh, through correspondence in Slovakia that I really learned what proper training was like, and that was definitely being thrown in the deep end. We were doing sort of 6 to 8 hours of training a day, and first
Wow.
few weeks there, I couldn't straighten my arms. I was just an absolute wreck. But so yeah, I was definitely late. I was late to taking tennis seriously, but on one side, I think that probably helped in a lot of ways to not feel burnt out or jaded by the whole tennis world and scene. Then again, the flip side of that is I was probably a decent way behind my peers when I made it over to Europe for the first time.
Yeah. So I was wondering whether you had that initial disadvantage, and also it seems like maybe you did. And how did you overcome that? Do you feel like having maybe a more diverse athletic background, or even kind of like a more varied perspective on life at that point, played to an advantage in any way? Or were you just like strictly you just had to compensate for the time you missed and just grind to catch up? Like, how'd that look?
Yeah, I think it was mainly the try and grind and make up the lost ground. Especially, this might be a personal thing. It might be a product of growing up in the country in New Zealand. I always felt imposter syndrome at sort of every level of professional tennis. So the way to get around that in my mind was to try to outwork everyone. So, I'd work hard enough that I felt like I deserved to win at each level. Uh, but I mean, so I had a decent amount of success in doubles in tennis, but I'd say I don't think I came anywhere close to reaching my potential in singles, and I think maybe having lost a number of years early in life, that could have something to do with it.
Doubles, I mean, naturally, like it's like inherently a collaborative endeavor. And do you think that coming from a soccer background might have helped you in that space and given you some sort of advantage?
Yeah, maybe. Or I always loved the team aspect of soccer, and I feel like doubles is sort of the it's sort of the perfect balance of so, one of the main reasons I chose tennis was because I liked the fact that it was all of the responsibility was on your shoulders. You
Hmm.
couldn't shirk, you couldn't coast. You know, if you had a bad day, you lost.
Hmm.
I really liked that aspect of it, but I love playing in a team. And doubles is sort of the perfect balance where, you know, if one half of a doubles pairing has a terrible day or shirks, then you're probably going to lose still. So you still have a huge amount of responsibility, but you
Hmm.
also have that collaboration and chemistry and energy that it's actually really important. Like the energy that a doubles pairing has goes a long way to winning matches or especially turning matches. So, you know, if a match is close or if a match is going against you and you have the right energy as a team, then you're far, far more likely to find a turning point where you can really quickly change the momentum. Um, and, you know, tooting my own horn a little bit here, I think my ability uh to buoy my partners, like to get the best out of the people that I played with,
Hmm.
I think that was one of my strengths that often goes unremarked or underappreciated, I think, in the tennis or doubles world. But I'm proud of my ability to do that over my career.
I mean, I'm sure that applies to a lot of different things in life as well, particularly leading a nonprofit and all the other accomplishments that been able to achieve. In particular, though, as it relates to tennis, was there a specific time period where you recognized that not only are you taking it seriously, but also you're starting to see promise in being able to compete at the highest levels and, you know, achieve great results and accomplishments?
Yeah, I saw a very rapid improvement when I moved to Europe and started training like crazy. I started seeing results pretty quickly and started climbing the rankings fairly quickly for my age. So that was a good sign. That was promising. I then got hamstrung by a bunch of injuries when I think the first serious injury happened when I was about 20, where I herniated a disc in my back pretty badly, and that's I think a direct result of overtraining. Like I was pushing too hard to try to make up the lost ground and probably not doing it in the smartest way, particularly in the gym. So was injured, was out for almost a year, and since that point had every year I had some sort of injury. So I saw quick results, but then continually got it was sort of two steps forward, one step back, until I started focusing on doubles, and then the injuries became a little more manageable.
What do you think you learned from those injuries, both in regards to tennis and health, but also maybe more broadly that you could apply towards other parts of life?
It's injuries are tough because a lot of the time, maybe this is my sort of career long frustration speaking here, but a lot of the time I don't think you can learn that much from injury, um, particularly if you've done the work to try to avoid getting injured. And that was my massive frustration with it all. I felt like I was working harder than my peers, doing more injury prevention work than my peers, and getting injured a lot more to the point where I eventually got a DNA test because I just wanted to try to figure out what was going wrong.
Hmm.
And it just turns out I have crappy soft tissue, and that's something that's genetic that you can't really do that much about.
Hmm.
Um, People are just born with a spectrum of brittleness of soft tissue, and mine was very brittle. Uh, so from that point, I actually had to start thinking about training smarter rather than longer or harder, which going back to that imposter syndrome point I made earlier was quite difficult for me because for me, the way that I internally developed the sense that I deserved to win was by working long and hard. So if I couldn't do that because I needed to avoid getting injured, then it was hard to train enough to feel like I deserved to win, but also keep injuries at bay. Um, I think to go back to your question, from tennis more broadly, and I think injury is part of this, I think the most important skill it's taught me is how to deal with failure. Because in tennis you fail so much. Like
Mhm.
you lose almost every week. It's only if you win a tournament that you don't lose in a given week. And there were many years in my career where I didn't win a tournament because
Mhm.
if you make finals, you still lose. You lose almost half of the points that you play in every match. Um, so dealing with failure is, if you can't deal with failure, you can't succeed as a tennis player. And I think injury is just another version of failure, and learning how to deal with it and learning how to try to take the positives from it and, work on the things you can work on and maybe get stronger in some areas that you didn't have time to address. That's all stuff that, maybe I didn't appreciate at the time, but looking back, yeah, it definitely builds that resilience.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much to learn from all that, and particularly the working harder, smarter, not harder. I think something that can apply in a lot of different domains. I'm curious, among those injuries, among the different setbacks that you might have faced in your career, was there any particular injury or setback where you more kind of existentially questioned whether you want to keep going or whether you have what it takes to keep going?
Absolutely. I tore my meniscus in 2022, and that was right at the end of the sort of COVID era of the tour. So we had a long stretch on tour where it was basically a traveling bubble and it was miserable. It was sort of a traveling prison. Like you could not leave the bubble of hotel and tennis courts. I hadn't been able to go home for about 20 months, 22 months,
Wow.
because New Zealand's borders were closed. Got to the Australian Open and eventually managed to get a spot in the quarantine hotels in New Zealand for just after the Australian Open. So decided to take that, go home and have a little stretch of a couple months where basically just to try and like rejuvenate, like, get some energy back. And pretty soon into that time, I tore my meniscus that required a surgery. Excuse me. And it was going to be a 6 to 9 month recovery. When I heard that, I thought, is this it? You know, I'm already burnt out from this long COVID period. Is my body finally failing enough that I'm just sort of done? I ended up needing two surgeries on that same knee. So a year after the first surgery, it hadn't healed well. So I needed a surgery on the same spot. And it took a long, long time to decide to come back and play one final year last year. Uh, and to be honest, in hindsight, if I were to make the decision again, I probably wouldn't play that final year.
Oh, really?
In some ways, it was nice to sort of answer the question that I was ready to be done, um, but yeah, I didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped I would.
At what point in your career were you training for the Olympics, and what year was it where you won the medal?
Yeah, so tennis is a strange one because I think there wouldn't be that many tennis players who train specifically for the Olympics. Like making it to the Olympics is a byproduct of doing really well on the tennis tour.
Right.
Um, so I played my first Olympics in Rio in 2016 and lost to Canada in the first round with match points and were just absolutely gutted. Um, and Michael Venus, the guy that I played with there, we sort of vowed to each other that we needed to make it back to the Olympics and do better. And we won the bronze medal in Tokyo in what ended up being 2021.
That's awesome. What did that feel like, and like how meaningful was that to you?
It's without a doubt the highlight of my tennis career. I mean, the Olympics is massive in New Zealand. Like that's the pinnacle. That's what I grew up. The Olympians were the ones that were idolized the most in New Zealand. And also in tennis, you don't often get a chance to play for your country. Most of the tennis tour is individual. So it's only playing Davis Cup, which might be once or twice a year, or the Olympics once every 4 years, that you actually get to wear New Zealand on your back. And for me, being a very proud Kiwi, that always meant a whole lot more. The other part that made it special is the New Zealand team brings the most incredible culture from New Zealand to the Olympic Village. Like when you arrive at the New Zealand building, you get welcomed with a haka from all the athletes and support team there. It's so powerful that you have other athletes literally running from different parts of the village to come and sort of experience what that feels like. Um, so that whole piece of being part of the New Zealand team at the Olympics is unique. Um, Another aspect that I hadn't really thought about speaking about until it was a few months after the Olympics that I first spoke about it, and then realized it probably adds interesting context. So I spoke earlier about the COVID period being really brutal and feeling very burnt out and not having been able to get home. So in the middle of 2021, I'd already been away from home for a year and basically just back to back to back in hotel rooms at tournaments. Um, was extremely burnt out. My long-term doubles partner had split with me about 4 weeks before the Olympics,
Oh wow.
so was already in a dark place. That happened, and I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to start from scratch again with someone. Well, first I'm going to have to try and find a partner that is available to play, that I feel like we can do well with. Like it's difficult to find a good doubles partner at the top. The list of people was very, very short. Um, so yeah, in a really dark place, and I didn't want to take that darkness to the Olympics because it meant so much to me. So the week before the Olympics, I actually came to up here to my in-laws' house in Connecticut, put my tennis bag in the closet and didn't look at it for a week just to try and sort of mentally reset myself. So I came into Tokyo not having picked up a racket for a week, um, and got there and had some really amazing chats with a mental skills guy, and was just like, hey, look, I'm really struggling, but I care deeply about doing well here. What can we do? And yeah, he gave some incredible advice. You know, this I don't think this is good advice for life in general, but it was a real serious effort to to compartmentalize, like to acknowledge that feeling, but try to sort of keep it in its spot so that I could perform
Mm-hmm.
during that couple of weeks. Excuse me. And yeah, so when it actually got to the end of the bronze medal match, and we actually beat the USA in the bronze medal match, when we won the final point, there was this elation and euphoria and all of the positive emotions that you'd expect from that moment. And there was also this flood of relief that I didn't have to try to suppress this darkness that I'd been suppressing for so long, like trying so hard to suppress for so long. And after that match, I was a sobbing wreck for like 20-30 minutes
Wow.
because it was just overwhelming, the sort of the bounds that I'd put on myself or on my mind or on my emotions for those 2 weeks to get
Mhm.
through it, and then being able to relax them. And yeah, it was really overwhelming.
You describe such a high emotion, high intensity, highly focused period of your career, and then you let go of that when you retire from a pro athlete career, and you have an entirely different reality. How does that transition feel? And do you ever feel like you miss those days where things had so much high stakes and where things were so personal to you?
I think I've been really lucky in a lot of ways. Um, one way being that I've always been interested in things a lot wider than tennis. So when you take tennis out of the picture, I have a lot left on the plate. I think, and that's not that's not sort of speaking down to people who focus narrowly on tennis for their career. I think there's real positives in that. I just think it makes it harder if people are super narrowly focused on tennis or on their sport to the exclusion of most everything else. When you take that away, there's a huge void that's hard to fill. I don't think that was the case for me. With high impact athletes, like high impact athletes was really kicking off in a big way around when I retired. So I could jump into that with both feet. I also had a 6 week old son when I retired, so
Wow.
that took a lot of time and energy.
Yeah.
And since Paris last year, I've also had a role with the International Olympic Committee, and so between those three things, between being a father to a young boy, high impact athletes, and all of the growth that's happening there, and then the IOC stuff. Honestly, I'm a lot busier than I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Post retirement, I thought I was gonna be very relaxed and be playing a lot of golf and yeah, just like living an easy life. But it's been really busy.
Yeah, wow. Okay, I can imagine. So, yeah, to go back a little bit to the foundations of, high impact athletes, you started that while you were still a pro athlete. Could you talk a little bit about like, just the story behind high impact athletes, but also what it's like to have these two lives that you're committed to at once?
Yeah, sure. I think they're very complementary. I started high impact athletes to scratch my own itch in a way. So when I first started making money from tennis, which I think was in about 2014, by that I mean expenses in tennis are huge because you're flying around the world to play these tournaments, staying in hotels, and all of those expenses are generally on you. So when I started earning enough prize money that I was, hitting the black at the end of the year, I felt this really powerful urge to give back, and I didn't really trust the charities I'd grown up around, so I wanted to do a bit more research. I did some Googling, came across the idea of giving effectively. So just like if you're going to give, you may as well try and do as much good as you can with whatever you give, which is such a simple, no-brainer idea, but actually applying that and making it happen in the real world is more difficult than I think a lot of people realize. Um, so anyway, I found some charities that, based on very rigorous research, seem to do a huge amount of good in the world per dollar. Started donating to them, made a 1% pledge the following year, built that pledge up over time. Come 2020, I think at the start of 2020, I'd made a personal commitment to 8% of my annual earnings
Wow.
donated to charity. Um, and then COVID hit and the tour stopped. So first time in my adult life, I had nothing to do really. Because even previously when I'd been injured, it was a daily grind of trying to rehab and get back on the train.
Hmm.
Um, so I had more time and space to think than I'd ever had before, and I started thinking about my own personal impact on the world and was there more that I could be doing? I felt like I couldn't give more financially, especially because if you're off tour as a tennis player, you've essentially lost your job. Like you're not earning money if you're not playing tennis matches at tournaments.
Hmm.
So then I thought, okay, well, if I can't donate more, then how else can I make an impact? And the piece that I'd neglected my whole career was the advocacy influence piece. So I don't have a huge profile as an athlete, but in New Zealand, I have somewhat known as an athlete, and I thought, well, if these ideas of giving back effectively are powerful for me, they might be powerful for other people. Specifically, they might be powerful for other athletes. So maybe I should just try and be the sort of gatherer of athletes who want to give back and do it in an effective way. And that was the conception of high impact athletes. Um, and honestly, I thought it was just going to be me pestering a group of my close friends on the tennis tour about these charities that I thought were great. But it was very obvious very quickly that there was a real appetite for this research backed, optimized version of giving. And yeah, so launched in December 2020. By the Australian Open the following year, so 2 months later, I was starting to think, oh shit, like this, we're going to need to have staff and we're going to need to take this seriously because this thing has legs.
Hmm.
And yeah, cut to today, and we have over 230 athletes from I think about 35 different countries around the world, and
Wow.
yeah, doing some really cool stuff.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome. And so it sounds like it really started to pick up momentum, and then you had to pour in the resources, pour in the energy and everything. But in order to bring it to a point where it starts to gain that type of momentum, was it conceptually in your head like, was it bucketed for you as kind of like a side project or like a passion project, or did you cognitively recognize that this is, you know, of equal weight for you as your tennis career?
It was definitely a side project, because still I felt like the most good I could do was becoming the best tennis player I could, earning more money so I could give more money away. The better I did, the bigger my profile would get, so I could speak more powerfully about these ideas. Um, it wasn't really until HIA had grown a fair amount that I realized that HIA itself was sort of the multiplier effect for me. Uh, and the other thing I'd say is professional tennis is all consuming, and you can't it can't not be if you want to succeed at the highest levels. Like the margins are so fine and everyone is so hungry that if it was more than a side hustle, I would have slipped pretty quickly. And I think honestly, I think part of the reason why I didn't enjoy my final year on tour was because by that stage HIA had actually sort of become the main thing and tennis was the side hustle.
Mm,
And so, my mind knew what it wanted to do with the tennis ball, and my body didn't really follow, which wasn't too much fun. But yeah, when it started, it was definitely a thing I was doing on the side that it was helpful to be in the locker rooms and talking to people about these ideas.
mm.
But it was a passion thing rather than a full-time thing.
As someone who has a side project right now, which is my podcast, it's cool to hear how you're able to take a project and make it something so big and so impactful. Uh, you touch on effective altruism a little bit, and I think before we started recording, I shared a little bit about my minimal familiarity with 80,000 hours. Could you describe those initiatives and organizations a little bit and share how they were relevant for high impact athletes?
Yeah, sure. So I think effective altruism has changed a lot since I first discovered it. Um, and to be completely frank, what the phrase effective altruism entails today is not something that I'm completely on board with. When I first came across it, and when I first came across 80,000 hours, it was very much focused on suffering that was happening in the present day that we could take verifiable action and create measurable change against. And that resonated deeply with me.
Mm,
Uh, I feel like effective altruism has sort of turned pretty sharply towards being future based and global catastrophic risk and AI safety and biosecurity, etc., which are all really important things. I'm really glad people were thinking about them, but they don't resonate with me as deeply as people who don't have access to safe water or animals who are suffering in factory farms or stuff that we know happens today rather than stuff that we fear will happen at some point in the future. So with
mm,
that caveat aside, yeah, 80,000 hours, they were my introduction to effective altruism back in 2014. And the reason, I think the reason they resonated so much was they gave just such an incredible practical guide for me to use my life and my career to do good in the world. Um, I've already sort of touched on these two pillars, but from memory, back then they had four pillars of impact in their guide, and two of them were earning to give and advocacy. So if you earn a ton of money, you can afford to give a ton of money away. And if you have a voice, if you have a platform, then you can advocate for good ideas from that platform. Um, so in my journey in giving, my first thought was earn to give, play
Mhm.
better tennis, earn enough money that I can give money away to these great charities. And then it wasn't until 2020 with high impact athletes that I realized that, probably due to a thing in New Zealand called tall poppy syndrome, where you just don't want to speak publicly about sort of good things that you're doing, or like, you don't want to boast. I'd never spoken about charity, but without going too far into the weeds, the sort of internal calculation I did there was, okay, I might be uncomfortable speaking about this stuff publicly, but if by speaking about giving effectively and giving to really impactful charities, one other person decides to take action, that could literally be a life saved,
Mhm.
or at least a life improved. So what's my discomfort about speaking publicly in relation to that? And it just sort of puts it all into perspective.
Yeah, wow. And did you say tour puppy syndrome? Or
Uh, so
yeah, I'd love to learn more about that because it sounds familiar conceptually, but yeah, I'd love to hear more about what that is.
it's called tall poppy syndrome. So
Okay,
poppies
perfect.
are flowers that generally grow uniformly in height,
Okay.
and the idea is that if one poppy grows taller, it'll be cut down to size so it doesn't stick out.
Hmm.
And that's in New Zealand culture. It's a very humble culture, and so if anyone starts boasting, or like flashing money around or whatever, people just rip into them and cut them down to size. And
Hmm.
I love that about New Zealand culture, because I think it's a much flatter society than a lot of places, but it makes some things harder, like speaking about charity that you're doing, or even actually for me, I think it made tennis a little bit harder, because tennis is all about sort of, you know, pushing yourself to the top ahead of other
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
But I think that's why New Zealand does better in team sports than individual sports.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And thank you for translating that to American English for me. Actually, like there's in Hebrew, there's a term. I mean, I'll just say it in Hebrew, but it's red ma'etz, which basically means come down from your tree, which sounds pretty like similar in its nature.
Right.
But yeah, culturally, I definitely see what you're saying about like American culture maybe being a little bit more um, receptive of people exalting in stuff that they do, not necessarily with a negative connotation. And I can see how that can be limiting when there's a little bit more resistance to stuff like that. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So um, I'm curious about like the learning curve of as a pro athlete starting a nonprofit, growing it into something at scale that has a high impact. I imagine there's so much to learn about running an organization, about bringing people together, about just effective giving and the likes in general. How did you do all of that learning? Did you lean on some stuff that you learned in school, or during your education, or did you have to kind of like pick up new skills and new knowledge?
Yeah, it was definitely just sort of learn as I went for the most part. One thing I'll say is the the community in the effective giving space were incredibly helpful. So I had so many calls where I just asked people stupid questions about starting an organization, or like mistakes that had been made. How could I avoid mistakes? And people were so open and so generous with their time, that now I try to sort of pay it forward a little bit with, if people ask me the same thing. Um, but yes, I mean, this has actually been part of the pleasure of doing this whole thing, is how steep that learning curve has been. I've always enjoyed learning new things, and there are a lot of aspects of running a non-profit, particularly one that's registered as a charity in a couple of different countries. I've become far more familiar with global tax deductibility laws across like 50 different countries than I ever thought I would be.
Mhm.
Um, just stuff like that. Also, managing a team is new to me. Um, in tennis, you're very self-sufficient and independent,
Mhm.
and if you travel with someone, it's a coach who is sort of a confidant, or you're definitely not managing your coach. Um, so that's a skill set that I've tried to learn and polish as I go. Hiring has been an interesting one. I've definitely made some mistakes there, and I've learned how difficult hiring can be, and how difficult finding the people who are a cultural fit for your organization can be. But in all, it's been a really fun journey, this whole thing. And honestly, I think we're just scratching the surface of the impact that HIA will make in the world. We have a couple of campaigns in the pipeline at the moment that I think could be huge. We have a global partnership with a fitness brand that is having a global rollout a week from now.
Wow.
So there are just like so many things popping off in so many different directions that I think could be massive for combining the sporting world with the like giving effectively or impactful charity world. That, yeah, steep learning curve, but totally been worth it, and I'm still really enjoying picking up new skills.
Thank you for making all that impact. I looked a little bit on your website and I saw the numbers about how many people you're impacting and how that translates into different metrics. And I just think it's super impressive. And along
Thank
those
you.
lines, like I'm very curious. Like in my work in tech, a lot of the things we do, we need to be able to quantify and define the return on investment, and everything is very data driven. So how do you like why is it important for you to be data driven in the space of making an impact, and how have you kind of navigated that?
Well, like I could very easily flip this around. So like why is it important to be data driven in the tech world, in the for-profit world? It's because if you're not, then you'll lose. And if you lose, you'll go out of business. And that's a bad thing.
Mhm.
I feel like in the non-profit world, because it's not competitive per se, too much crap is let through the gate. And
Mm.
so you have this huge swath of really average charities that don't do that much good, but still carry on because people want to help. And so, people give a small amount monthly, and so they just carry on. Whereas if it was a competitive world, then, maybe 80% of them would go under, and that would probably be a good thing because it would let the really good charities take off and do even more good at scale. So I don't see any valid reason why the non-profit space shouldn't be as data driven as the for-profit space. If the goal is to do as much good in the world as we can, then scientific method is how we do that. I mean, you could argue that there's important work that needs to be done in narrative change and cultural change and this sort of stuff. But again, like ideally you attach metrics to that so you can measure and at least know if you're moving in the right direction. Um, so yeah, this is something that I'm really passionate about, and it's a point of difference for high impact athletes, and I think that's why we've become so popular with athletes, is because we don't deal in bullshit. Like if an athlete supports one of the charities that we recommend, then they know that it's been deeply, rigorously researched and vetted, and that there are tangible outcomes from supporting that charity.
Mhm.
Such that at the end of each year, we send a personal impact report to each athlete
Wow.
based on where they've donated and how much they've donated, with a best guess as to how much real world impact they've personally made. And
Mhm.
that's a real hit with our athletes because it's nice to know that you've actually done something, and you know you can dive into the reams of research that are done to bear out those best guesses, but it's pretty damn impressive, that research.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I could rant on about this for a long time, but for me for me, if you're not trying to measure something, then there'd better be a really good reason. Otherwise, I think you might just be peddling some crap.
Yeah. Wow, I never actually thought like pause to consider how impactful it is, like that kind of intersection of athletes being intrinsically statistically driven because they're always, I mean, generalizing, but from an outside perspective, like everything can be quantified in sports, whether it's for basketball, like rebounds, points, blocks, assists, etc. And I imagine the same applies to a bunch of different sports, and also being super competitive. And you merge that with nonprofits being, impactful and mission driven, and I think you get something really awesome. So bringing athletes into nonprofit sounds like a really big asset in that regard.
Totally. One word that I think resonates across both spheres is optimization. Like athletes, professional athletes optimize every minute of every day to find the extra 0.1% that might give them the edge over their competitors. And they appreciate if the charities that they're supporting try to optimize as well,
Mhm.
um, which makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And to kind of continue along that theme, you discuss a little bit about what you had to learn when you started high impact athletes, and the nature of a learning curve of going from one discipline into another. But what do you think, as a pro athlete, were some of the strengths that enabled you to succeed in nonprofit leadership? And I guess would you call it business in this context? Or yeah, I'm not sure what the word is, but yeah.
Yeah, I would. Like the way I think about it is we're an early stage startup without the possibility of having a big exit. Like
Yeah.
we're all of the hard work without any of the big reward.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, I think uh, I spoke about it earlier. The ability to deal with failure has been by far the most important skill because, especially when you're dealing with, in some ways, it's almost like sales. Like I'm talking with athletes about this approach to charity and the charities that we support and saying, hey, these are the ideas. This is why I believe in them. Would love to have you involved in this. Um, and to be fair, I think if I get in a one-on-one conversation with an athlete, it's something like 7 or 8 out of 10 end up getting involved.
Mhm.
But there's still failure involved, and there's still people who don't want to have that chat. So, dealing with that, not getting disheartened, believing in the mission of what we're trying to do, and that, if we keep cracking on with it, then a lot of good will happen in the world. Um, yeah, that's been fundamental for the success of HIA. But I can also imagine, I don't have experience in the business world, but I just believe that that's probably a useful skill, full
Mhm.
stop, being able to deal with failure and improve from it.
When you ultimately decided to step away from tennis, did you experience any sort of like identity crisis or something along those lines?
I thought I would, and I didn't. And I think I might have experienced the identity crisis earlier. So when I first tore my meniscus and had the surgery and was on crutches for a long time, and I didn't know if I was going to go back and play more tennis. And people I'd meet would say, "What do you do?" And for the first time in my life, I didn't know how to answer that,
Mm.
which was weird. That was a really weird feeling. Uh, and it felt a little like I was a little bit unmoored because of it. Um, but I think, yeah, maybe going through a little bit of that when I was injured and then coming back and playing another year on tour, and very early in that year realizing that I was ready to be fully done with professional tennis. I think maybe that certainty allayed the identity crisis piece once I actually retired. And then also, I mentioned that since retirement, I've been a lot busier than I ever expected.
Mhm.
So it's almost like I haven't had time for for an identity crisis or whatever. And now I guess a big part of my identity now is dad.
Yeah, what's that been like? By the way, I got engaged a few months ago and I'm getting married later this year. So I'm not a
Congrats.
father. Thank you. Not a father at the moment. Hopefully I will be in a few years. But I'm curious, you're a few steps ahead of me in that regard. What's that journey been like for you?
It's been really incredible. It's been more difficult than I expected. Um, I think you can you think you can prepare yourself for the sleep deprivation and all of that side of things, but I don't think you really can. Like it's that side of things just is really hard. And it's definitely a lifestyle change in terms of, I my whole adult life, my world revolved around me and making myself better and uh, taking resources from the world to make myself better, coaching or physio or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And then your kid comes into the world and like everything revolves around them, and it's absolutely the way it should be.
Mhm.
But it's also that's also been a little harder than I expected. Because I guess this might also be a personality thing, but both my wife and I always needed our own sort of personal space and time.
Mhm.
And it's a lot harder to get that when a baby is in the mix and we're both working full time. So yeah, the sleep deprivation and the sort of finding time for yourself to recharge the batteries harder than I expected, but man, it's so worth it.
I mean, sounds like an incredible journey, and I don't know. I feel like I might be, romanticizing metaphors and stuff like that. But the fact that your tennis career has been playing doubles, like I imagine for parenting, that might be super applicable. Of like just lifting each other up, being able to work as a team. Uh, am I just kind of like stretching different themes, or
I
do you
don't know,
feel like,
maybe
yeah,
ask my wife what she thinks about that
okay,
one.
yeah, for sure. But that's really cool. So wait, so how long have you been a dad?
He is 6.5 months.
Has he picked up a tennis racket yet?
Not yet, and you know what? I If he wants to play tennis, more power to him. I'll support him, but I would not push him into it at all.
Is that a deliberate thing for you, or I just wonder, because I imagine that it can go both ways. Like people who were pro athletes really want their kids to kind of follow their footsteps. Are you intentionally not going to enforce that within your family environment?
Oh, I would like not to be prescriptive with him.
Hmm.
So, I think every parent has expectations of their kids. I think that's impossible to get around, but um, I hope he likes sport and wants to do sport and wants to compete at a high level. And I hope that he has that ability, uh, because I really do think sport really enriches life in a lot of ways. Yeah, I mean, not even sport at a high level. I think just sport in general just really enriches life.
Hmm.
Working with a team and competing and just sort of getting out and being active and um, but yeah, just with tennis specifically, it's a really lonely, brutal, exhausting life, and the chances of actually making it as a tennis player are minuscule. Um, and you know, many tens of thousands of tennis players every year give up after years and years of chasing the dream without even coming close to breaking even or making it to, even the sort of second tier of professional tennis.
Yeah.
Um, so I would just want to be very clear about that aspect of it. But if he still ended up wanting to pursue it, then I'll support as much as I possibly could.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's a great kind of insight, and I imagine that it might like just taking it away from parenting in particular, but just the experience of succeeding in a space where your chances are so low. Now you need to translate that into another space where things aren't necessarily guaranteed to succeed, which is running a nonprofit. I imagine that those instincts and that like proof of concept that you gave yourself that you could apply that success in one space probably informs like how you approach uh, dreaming big in like a new mission that you kind of started pursuing.
Yeah. I also, this I'm sure is incredibly biased, but just from what I've seen in my 5 or so years of having done high impact athletes, is my norm has been to be surrounded by elite athletes who have thrown their life at succeeding at something. And so that's just been normal for me.
Mhm.
That sort of work ethic, that dedication, that determination. And then um, I guess sort of operating more in the normal world, if you will, I've realized that that elite athlete approach to things is a massive weapon,
Mhm.
because not many people in the world are willing to throw themselves at something and have the determination and grit that elite athletes have to make it to the top. And quite a large chunk of the team that work at high impact athletes are ex-Olympians or ex-professional athletes. And so I think we actually have a real advantage there, in that everyone is just really really keen to make this work, and has the grit and resilience and determination that comes from having been an elite athlete for a long time.
That must be super powerful. And when you're describing the learning curve earlier, and you're talking about learning things as specific as international taxes and stuff like that. Um, when I like conceptualize as a non-pro athlete, uh, pursuing an athletic career versus pursuing like the more traditional path of education, or not even education, but like going into kind of full-time work at in your 20s and then just kind of pursuing a career in one lane. Sometimes the concept of going into pro athlete mode or career can feel conceptually like pursuing your passion, and it can even be romanticized as like this super fun and fulfilling adventure that you kind of just go after what you love. But in practice, I imagine that the discipline and the attention to detail, and even some mundane tasks that you need to repeat over the course of years, it's not it probably like I imagine it's not all beautiful and all like fun every day. So as someone who's who performed at the highest levels, could you reflect a little bit on that, and maybe on what someone who's not a pro athlete might not understand about the reality of being a professional athlete?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's easy from the outside to look at sport and think that's really glamorous and amazing. And to be fair, are there are aspects of it that are really cool.
Hmm.
So speaking to tennis, which is the only sport that I know inside out, yes, you do get to see a huge amount of the world, go to incredible cities, um, learn different cultures, and some of these, especially if you're playing at the highest level, some of these tournaments are beautiful, and you feel appreciated as an athlete. Um, Outside of that, living out of a suitcase for 10 and a half months of the year is really exhausting and difficult. Living in
Hmm.
a hotel room for 10 and a half months of the year is really exhausting and difficult. Flying to a different city every week or 2 weeks takes it out of you. Like, I don't know how many days in aggregate of my life I have spent waiting in customs lines, or like waiting for flights. Um, that's not glamorous. And unless you're in the top, you know, 20 in the world, like I flew coach everywhere except the only I flew business class maybe 3 times in my professional tennis career, and it was only if I'd done well enough during a particular tournament that I was playing the finals on Sunday, had to fly to a different country that was, a decent distance away and had to perform again on the Monday or Tuesday.
Hmm.
But, that's three flights out of I don't know how many hundreds I took over the course of my career.
Yeah.
Um, and flying coach as a 6'3", that's not fun if you're trying to perform physically at the other end.
Yeah.
Um, Training is it is brutal. The flip side of that, the positive side of that, is we do get to stay fit for a living.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of it is repetitive, very repetitive, because it has to be to hone the sort of skill that you need.
Hmm.
Um, and also there are aspects of training that there are depths that not many people push themselves to. Like I remember these sessions I used to do when I was living and training in the UK, and it sounds strange, but the session in total only had 2 minutes of work, but every time I did this session, I spewed at least twice. So there are these sessions that you
Sorry,
do that
sorry to
are,
interrupt, but you said spewed?
yeah, like vomited.
Okay, got it. Yeah, just wanna make sure I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there are these things that you do that are deliberately painful, like deliberately take you to a place that's really dark and deep,
Mhm,
because that's the sort of capacity that you're trying to develop as a professional athlete, to go to these places and still perform. Um, that's not fun, you know.
yeah.
I would never ever do that session now that I'm not a professional athlete. Like why?
Mhm,
Um, so yeah, so I absolutely acknowledge that there's an aspect of glamour at the top of tennis.
mhm.
Um, the vast majority of it is not glamorous and very exhausting.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's really interesting to hear kind of the back end that goes into all of that. Uh, so with athletics, and we'll take tennis as an example, setting targets and setting goals, I feel like is fairly a tangible thing to do because there's a tournament that you want to succeed in. There's the Olympics, there's medals. And then, in what you do today with high impact athletes, I know that you're very data driven and you have, I imagine you have certain targets. Could you reflect on how you set goals for high impact athletes and if there's any kind of vision for particular goals that you really, really want to aspire to?
Yeah, for sure. Like we follow the OKR model within HIA. So,
Hmm.
and all of the key results are metrics, like things that we can measure.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure how much I should speak to the numbers of our internal goals.
Hmm.
Uh, the ratio that we focus on the most is what we call the impact multiplier, and this is something that I think every charity should be laser focused on, and that is per dollar that you spend on OpEx, or per dollar that you spend on whatever you do. For us, it's how many dollars do we channel to the charities that we support. So our role, if you were to completely simplify it, is sort of as middlemen. We try to connect the athletes with the charities. We're trying to facilitate this connection. So for every dollar that we spend on doing that, how much money actually goes to the charities at the end of the day?
Hmm.
That's the thing that we focus on the most. And if we ever got below, say, a 3 to 1, so by that I mean for every dollar that we spend, $3 gets to the charities.
Hmm.
I would I don't think I would want to continue with HA, because I think I could probably make more impact doing something else. So
Hmm.
that's the main thing that we focus on, and 3 to 1 being an absolute minimum. We see a world where in the next 24 months we be at sort of a 50 to 1, 100 to 1.
Wow. So 50 to, sorry, could you, yes, 50 to 100 to 1, did you
So,
say?
for example, for every dollar that we spend on HIA's operations, so our
Mhm.
staff, the production costs of campaigns, etc., $50 goes to the charities that we support.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's huge. That's awesome. Do you from your work with athletes who are joining the cause, are there particular missions that you feel resonate most often among athletes?
This has been a really interesting one to watch happen sort of in real time. Our most popular charity is one called the Humane League, which
Okay.
fights against factory farming. Um, and it's clear cut that they're our most supported charity, which was a real surprise to me. I mean, it's that's sort of my personal uh, passion is the animal welfare side of things.
Mhm.
So maybe maybe it's a little bit of my bias shining through if I'm speaking to athletes about it. Uh, I also think the Humane League has really great storytelling around their why, like why they do what they do and why it's important. The other cause area that's really started popping off recently is gender-based violence. So last year, following the Paris Olympics, a Ugandan marathoner called Rebecca Cheptegei was murdered by an ex-partner, like in the most
Wow.
horrific fashion. Um, yeah, I'll let people look it up if they want to. Like it was just disgusting.
Wow.
Um, and we had an outcry from the athlete community saying, "Hey, let's try and do something about this." So we looked into it, and the more I researched the statistics around gender-based violence globally, the more shocked I was. I mean, the stat that sealed the deal for me in terms of I need to spend time on this was 1 in 3 women globally faces physical or sexual abuse in their life. 1 in 3 women.
Wow.
Like that is an insane statistic.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is it's not totally correlated to the wealth of a country. So that stat remains pretty constant regardless of how wealthy or how poor a country is. In New Zealand, we have really bad stats around gender-based violence. Like I think we're actually higher than 1 in 3. I think we're around
Wow.
40%. So this is a global problem,
Mhm.
and it's also one where I think athletes are probably perfectly positioned to be messengers
Yeah.
because athletes do cut through different layers of society, and especially male athletes often are seen as powerful masculine figures. And while the problem is generally borne by women, it's really a problem with the men. It's men doing the violence. So if we can speak to men and young men about how to be a good man, that being a good man means not hitting women,
Mhm.
then that's really powerful. Yeah, so I went off on a little rant there, but yeah, so animal welfare, in particular factory farming, and then more recently, since we ran a gender-based violence campaign last year in Uganda, gender-based violence has been picking up some steam for us.
Wow. Okay. And first off, yeah, those numbers are shocking. I didn't know. I knew that these problems are
Neither.
so prevalent, but wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Appreciate you sharing that. So you touch on I was familiar with the effective giving component of HIA. So there's also advocacy because you said you ran some campaigns, but could you maybe briefly touch on that?
Yeah, so we ran 2 campaigns last year. One was mine. In my final year on tour, I pledged to give 50% of my prize money to basically split evenly between the 12 charities that HIA supports. And then I asked my fans and followers to pledge a small amount for each point that I won on tour. Um, that ended up doing pretty well. I think we raised around 100 grand over the year.
Wow.
Um, and and I think it got in front of an earned media. I think it was something like 200 million people.
Wow.
I think that was mainly from it had a profile in Forbes. And this is actually one of the really powerful things about athletes doing these types of campaigns is media outlets really want to cover this.
Mhm.
I mean, my profile is not big enough to have a Forbes profile, but because I was doing this campaign, they wanted to do that. The other one we ran was a 6-week campaign with a New Zealand boxer called David Nyika, who's an Olympic medalist, and until recently was an undefeated professional boxer, where for each punch that he landed in an upcoming fight, he was going to donate $10 to the Against Malaria Foundation and asking his fans to to come along on the ride.
Hmm.
And that one, over the course of 6 weeks, I think got something like 215
Wow.
million of reach across earned
Oh
media.
wow.
So this is, media that we didn't pay to get. This is purely from the power of the story. Also
Mhm.
had millions of impressions on social media, etc., etc. Um, so that I think speaks to the advocacy piece. So
Yeah.
if athletes take a stand for these causes, put their own skin in the game, and it's authentic, then the message gets spread far and wide because it's a really beautiful message. And
Mhm.
and because these days I think people want their brands and their companies and their athletes, they want everything to be for more than just the thing, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
You it's almost like you can't just be an athlete now. You have to be an athlete who also stands up against X, or an athlete who also does Y.
Mhm.
There's sort of this extra in. So I think it fits in a lot of ways.
That's really impactful stuff. And I'm curious how you define athlete for the work you do. Like, what is the cutoff for someone to qualify as relevant for the scope of HIA?
Yeah, we've had a lot of internal discussions around this, and where we landed was to be a high impact athlete as part of the sort of elite athlete community. You have to have represented either professionally, so you need to have either played professional sport or represented your country on the international stage.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's 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 where we are currently, but can be
Cool.
dynamic.
Yeah. Okay. So I have zero chance of ever qualifying in that regard. But
Hey,
yeah.
never say never.
Yeah. We'll see. Maybe I'll make a major pivot, which I doubt at this point that I'll be capable of. But yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. Yeah. So I know that we're coming up on time, and I really appreciate this awesome conversation. It's really been an honor, and I've learned a ton. Do you have anything that you hope our listeners take away from your story, whether it's your professional sports career or your pivot into starting a nonprofit? Anything that you would like an audience that I have no idea how big that audience is going to be, but to take away?
The thing I'd love people to think about is is their own approach to giving. Um, at its absolute core, what I would love HIA to achieve is to make as many people around the world as possible think deeply about where they give and why, and think rigorously about that. Because if we just redirected the flows into philanthropy to the places that are 10 times better just by being better run or focusing on more cost effective interventions, we could do 10 times more good in the world with the same amount of money. Um, so that seems really important. And I guess like attached to that, I didn't really touch on it, but when I first made a percentage pledge, and I started with a 1% pledge, I think in 2015 or 16, that actually it changed the way I felt about tennis, because suddenly having it suddenly meant that I was playing for something bigger than myself. And I think that can apply across any profession. If you commit a percentage of your income to charity, to something bigger than yourself, it means that a small part of what you do on a day-to-day basis is for the greater good. It's for a deeper purpose. And that for me was a really beautiful aspect of my life. And honestly, I think it probably extended my tennis career for 2, 3 years. Like it made me want to play for longer. So yeah, thinking about where you give and thinking about purpose and um, maybe making a percentage pledge.
It's really cool to hear your story. I think you've had such an awesome career and life, and excited to kind of keep up with your next steps and with HIA success. Anywhere that you think people who want to follow you should go if they want to keep up with your journey?
Yeah, sure. I am really crappy at social media. I always intend to be better and more active, but I never seem to make it happen. But I'm Marcus Daniel NZ on Instagram, I believe. Um, but more importantly, follow high impact athletes on Instagram because there's going to be some really cool stuff happening on that channel soon.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. I appreciate your time. I'm just going to hit stop on the recording. But yeah, thank you for joining us.
Cool. Thanks a lot, man.